Hello, hello. Happy Sunday and welcome back to the UpSet podcast. We're so happy that you chose to tune in this evening. And when I say we're, you know who I'm talking about. This great bunch here. What's up?
Hey.
Hola.
Hey.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Doing good.
Doing good? Okay. You look good, at least.
We don't look like what we've been through.
That's right.
It's one way to put
That's
it.
what we say, at least. So I know, just to kick it off, this is a big graduation week for our schools. We have a lot of our schools within Allegheny East Conference who have held the graduations, even Pine Forge Academy earlier today. So we want to just start off by congratulating everyone. Job well done. We congratulate you on the next steps. Now, Pat, you did DuPont's.
Yeah, they had 11 students. They had 11 students. It was really good. Really good out there. Awesome.
Okay, awesome. And my daughter graduated from Jessie R. Wagner. Ninth grade. She'll be attending Pine Forge Academy. As far as
All right.
We're excited about that. It's kind of a full circle moment for me. That was working at Pine Forge Academy was my first job out of Oakwood.
Wow.
And I used to say, I can imagine sending my child here. And now here I'm at that point where I'm
They have
to
stay on campus, though, right?
They don't have to, but she will. That's the plan for her.
Wow. You're kicking her out the house. Wow.
Well, don't say it like that.
She'll be crying. Next Sunday show, she'll be crying.
Yes. But what else has been going on in the world aside from our graduations that's catching your attention, guys?
Well, there was a big headline this week was Tina Turner.
Oh, yeah.
She was considered the queen of rock and roll. But if when you have time, listeners and viewers, do some history on her. She was born in 1939 in Brownsville, Tennessee, but she ended up becoming a Swiss citizen.
Yeah,
right. I saw that.
Very nicely, by the way. But she had a very, very tough life. A lot of domestic abuse and whatever.
Right.
I was just amazed when I kind of dived in to see, about her. I as a musician, I never really followed her. I knew Ike and Tina Turner were a big thing, but she was 83 years old.
Yeah,
she passed away.
Yeah.
And Chuck,
and what was amazing is that she started off in the fields, down south, and very, very poor. And they say that her estate at her death was $250 million.
Wow.
And Chuck, I just saw a program on her last night on BET, and she was saying that she never did drugs or alcohol. She believed in being healthy. She says, I think I'm going to live to 100 years old. So
yeah, she was looking good. I mean, I think that's why it took me by surprise, because I feel like the last time I saw her, she seemed so vibrant and full of life. And I'm like, what? Like, it really shocked me. But what another thing you were saying, Charles, I saw that Dr. Kesslin, who was a guest on the podcast, she was touting her as a domestic abuse survivor and talking about her as a warrior. So many people are talking about her musical career, but there's so much to her strength and what she survived that needs to be highlighted. So
and her husband Ike had so much control over her.
Yeah.
I mean, he was the one who changed her name.
Yeah,
her name was not. She was not born Tina.
That's right. Ida May something of. You're right.
Yeah.
But through all of that, she managed to actually make a comeback. I think around her mid 40s or early 50s.
That's right.
Wow.
And she found love again. I'm hearing that her love story with her husband is
16
for
years younger.
Yeah, one for the book.
And also,
what's wrong with that, Marlena? What's wrong with? I'm got to stop you. What was wrong with that?
I was smiling. I didn't say anything bad. She said she liked him, and she told him, right?
Right.
But I wanted to say that when she divorced him, she finally left. I don't know if you remember that story when he beat her badly in that car and she'd go in the hotel bloodied and beat up. She decided to leave him for good then. And when she left, the only thing she had was her name. She had nothing else. So she was cleaning houses for friends. She was doing just regular things. She had absolutely no money. So all those millions, Chuck, that you talked about, she got it again, you know,
Yeah.
under her own solo
Beautiful.
projects. She did that.
Yeah.
That's inspiration right there, man.
And her husband, quite frankly, died of overdose of drugs.
And she was in the is it Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice with him. She came in by herself. So
that's right. Wow.
You know, some of our listeners might say, well, you know, why should we care about a rock and roll star? The rock and roll star is what she did. You know, rock and roll is what she did. But as a person, she was an icon to a lot of
she made a difference. Yeah.
and an encouragement to a lot of people, especially to women and specifically African American men. So music aside, she was quite a person to, you know, to look up to because of the adversity she had to go through.
Yeah.
She survived. Woohoo. Yeah, well, rest in peace, Tina Turner.
And let's pray for that issue with the debt ceiling that all of Congress went on the holiday leave without voting for it. And people's checks are supposed to be released on June the 1st. So we pray that something happens on the 30th and 31st so they get their monies.
Yes.
What about the Twitter? The Twitter launch, DeSantis with the Twitter.
Oh.
Yeah, we don't got to talk about it. I'm just
it's out there, right?
Listen, he put his name in the bid for presidency of America. So he is one of the several Republicans who are running to be president. The next go round. Right. So it's going to be interesting.
Yep, it will be. It will be. I just said that really for Chuck and all the tech people. Realize that if you don't get it right the first time coming out, oh my goodness, how it was going to be. So they had some glitches coming out. Only 300,000 people. Come on, we have some kids in Adventism and the communication that get more people than that.
Oh my!
What's the guy's name that was part of communication? This CamCon. What's his name? CamCon from Andrews University.
Kevin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's it. He did better than
cross culture Kev.
He sure did better than him coming out in the science. That's okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, and somewhere down the road, we need to do a show on freedom of speech.
Sure.
Yeah,
it's really, really closing in. And I think
we
should be concerned as people of Christ-centered people. We should be concerned about that.
Yep. And also, I don't know if you guys saw the report of, the whole issue with the banning of the books, people are banning books. And, it's 11 people who are pushing that. In all of this wide country, 11 people have the power to ban the books that go throughout the whole country.
Yep. It's crazy.
Well, I don't know if you've ever seen that science fiction movie Fahrenheit 451. It is a movie about banning of books. And if you had a book in your home, the fire department would come to your house and set all your books on fire.
Wow.
You were not allowed to have a book. So, the moral to the story of that motion picture was you had to become a book. And there was a place in the science fiction, there was a place where those people dwelt and they were books. So if you wanted to know something about the Bible, they would point out one or two people who could recite the entire Bible to you.
Wow.
So you wouldn't be caught reading it.
Mercy.
It's kind of deep, but
living epistles. Come on, Chuck.
Wow. All right, guys. Well, we all know what this weekend is. I guess we all know. I tried to give you guys a hint if you didn't know behind me. Memorial Day.
Memo Day.
Yes, that's right. I'm covering most of Memo Day. Memorial Day. We even call it Memorial Day weekend, even though Memorial Day is actually on Memorial Day weekend, and it's become one of those things that pretty much stands for a lot more than what it was intended. People consider it the start of summer. It's a big time for families to come together and have a barbecue and sales and all of that.
Wait a minute, can we wear white or something like that?
Yeah, I was about to say
the official start of wearing white. Yes, if you were wearing prior,
winter white,
right.
So it's funny how those things.
And I saw a sign. We were talking about this in the green room. I did see a sign the other day. I was driving by, and it said "Happy Memorial Day."
Yeah,
and that stung me.
Yep. That's right. That's one of those things, the don'ts of Memorial Day. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because we hear holidays, that's the first thing we want to shout, right? Happy whatever. The thing about Memorial Day is we make it very celebratory and full of festivities and joy and things of that nature, but it really has more of a solemn tradition. And so, today we kind of just want to talk a little bit, dig a little deeper into what the day, where it came from, how we're supposed to celebrate it, how we're not supposed to celebrate it, maybe some interesting facts we didn't realize about it. Because these holidays come and go, and sometimes we don't even take the time to really understand what we're celebrating or if we should be celebrating. So Memorial Day actually began, okay, I'm not going to quiz you guys. So I was going to say, do you guys know? Like,
school's out, no quizzes. No
I know, right? Well, we all know about, of course, the Civil War. And I guess by the spring of 1865, about 620,000 soldiers' lives had been claimed. And so because of this volume, it necessitated having the first national cemeteries. So there were so many bodies, so many deaths that they needed to, find a place in which to house all of these bodies. And so that kind of started what kind of folded into Memorial Day, because they wanted to not just bury these people, but obviously honor them for what they had done. And so much so that after World War I, the day actually expanded to including that tradition of honoring everyone who had died in all the American wars, not just the Civil War. But it wasn't until 1971 when it was actually defined. That's when it became a national holiday, 1971. It's always interesting to me because I feel like some of these things have been in place forever. And I'm like, wait, that was only a few years before I was born that this became defined by an act of Congress. And it was known as the Uniform Monday Holiday Act. It's an interesting name. And that's why we know it typically happens, it is the last Monday in May. And so, in fact, before it was called Memorial Day, it was called Decoration Day. Now, somebody may say decoration, but when we think about decoration in terms of typically they lay flowers at the graves. So they're talking about decorating the flowers. And that's one of the reasons, I don't know if you guys know, that's one of the reasons why it's called, why it's in May, because May is when the flowers start coming out. So it kind of coincided with, this is a great time to honor them because now we have the flowers to be able to lay on their graves. So
let me ask you this. Did Memorial Day come before or after the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier? Do you know if that was established before Memorial Day? I mean, that question just popped in my head because as you were talking, I was thinking of that.
Check it out.
Tomb of the Unknown Soldier.
That's a good question because that is part of some of the traditions that happen on Memorial Day. So it would be good to know when that kind of got started. But so in essence, Memorial Day has a lot more, and I'm going to kind of roll right into what you were saying, Charles, about people say Happy Memorial Day. And it's like, no, this is not really a happy Yeah, it's not a celebration. This is more of because it almost is like you're saying, "I'm glad people died." When you say that, so we have to be very sensitive to not saying Happy Memorial Day, because what we're honoring Memorial Day are people who died while serving in the army, and so some people say, "Oh." Because I hear a lot of people, anytime there's like a holiday that's honoring soldiers, they think all soldiers, or they think, they lump everybody in. And it's okay to thank, veterans and those who serve, but Memorial Day is specifically for those who died while in service. So sometimes it was war, sometimes there were other situations where they were actively serving and something happened and they lost their life. And so it's important for us to kind of educate ourselves. It's, anytime we see a flag associated with a holiday, we just automatically kind of just lump it into, people who serve. But this is specifically to honor those who passed. So
and when you
ahead.
you look at it on a grand scheme, to understand the catastrophic effect that the loss of military men and women has on any country.
Mm-hmm.
If you say, 300,000 soldiers were lost during whatever war, that's 300,000 families.
Right.
Think about it. It's somebody's father, uncle, brother, mother, sister that was taken out in a war. And when you look at it from that perspective, that's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, when you lose a military person, that, there are some people who just feel like they've been lost because it was a relative or a friend or a colleague.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's why people have so much, fear and consternation when sometimes when family members say they're going to enlist or they're going to serve, they're like, oh no, because they know the possibilities. And,
Right.
And so like you were saying, for these families, that became their reality, that they lost their loved one to service. Of course, they're honored, but that doesn't take away their grief, that they feel from losing their loved one. And I did want to say, we talked about not honoring those who serve on Memorial Day. I mean, it's okay to honor them. We should honor them, people who serve every day. But It's almost like when it's Father's Day or Mother's Day, and someone says, "Don't forget the fathers," and it's like, yeah, they, there's a day for them. Veterans Day. That's when we honor them. So let's not kind of mix the two. Just want to make sure, because we make these mistakes all the time, and we don't do them intentionally. Even when we say Happy Memorial Day, we're usually saying it to say, hope you have a great weekend, but
enjoy your day off.
Right.
Yeah.
Catch that sale at Best Buy.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And not only that, but depending on different towns that you're from, they have parades.
Yep.
And the parades are normally festive parades. They are festive parades. So, they're not walking quietly or something like that. Until we know someone, and I think mine was the Iraqi war. I didn't know anyone that had ever passed before until the Iraqi war. And it was my principal's son who died. It changed everything for me. It just changed everything for me. I know that this may not come as a surprise to the gang, but I frequent cemeteries. So I could be driving down the street and there's a cemetery. A cemetery is like a park. You're allowed to go in and see, what's the oldest interment there, whichever. But if you ever had the chance to go to the Arlington National Cemetery, it is an amazing feat to be able to go there. Yes, you're looking at streams and streams and streams of crosses and bodies, and not bodies, but tombstones. But on the other side of it, you have an appreciation. And I know, guys, don't jump on me for this. You have an appreciation for freedom. You have an appreciation for I know things are looking wonky now as far as Constitution and all of that's concerned, but people died for us to be able to speak, for us to be able to live, for us to be able, civil rights. People died for all of those. I'm not a war guy, but now for me, when Memorial Day comes around, it's a different feeling than pomp and circumstance. When I walk there, I now have an idea of thank yous, appreciation, gratitude, for them, even if I don't agree with why. I still have that. Yeah. Yep.
Some communities I've noticed in quite about 2-3 weeks ago, a community here in Pennsylvania. I was driving on my way somewhere, going through a small town. And what this small town was doing was putting up on their street lights photographs made into a banner, actually, of the in memorial to the individuals from that community who died in the war or defending this country. So more and more communities are starting to do that. And you may not, they're not famous people, but they're people that were from that community.
Right.
Neighbors and, uncles and aunts and whatever. So as you walked down the street in a community or you drive down, you would see their photos in the form of a banner hanging from the street lights. I thought that was very powerful.
Yeah, I saw that too in a neighborhood near me, and I found myself, when I was at the light or if I had stopped at a store, actually reading them, and a lot of them, all of them, had interesting, stories about their lives, and to know that they lived right in the community kind of helped it kind of hit home a little bit more. So, it's good to kind of make it personal. I think, when we're talking about some of the things we can do during a Memorial Day, find ways to personalize it or make a connection. Because sometimes, like you said, if we don't know anyone personally or we haven't been impacted, we kind of disregard these things and we go to the barbecue side of things and the sales side of things because that's,
barbecue and sales.
That's kind of where our minds go. Oh, it's Memorial Day. We get off and we get to.
And that's because of the marketing.
Yep.
In this country, that we just get, we're just greedy. Anytime
I feel you,
sell
Chuck.
a TV,
easy, Chuck.
As solemn as that, right?
That industrial complex, I tell you, it's all up, in our country, and we don't stop to think. We don't stop to think. We say, oh, it's a holiday, time off. Well, guess what? There are a lot of people that don't have time off. They got to work right on through the weekend, regardless of Memorial Day.
Right.
But it's important, and it's also to remember the loss in our most recent conflicts right now.
Yeah.
Ukraine and Russian soldiers are dying as we speak right now. And again, not to talk about right and wrong and who's the bad guy, who's the good guy. When a Russian soldier falls, that affects a Russian family.
That's
when
right.
a Ukrainian soldier falls, that affects a Ukrainian family. And mainstream media just talks about these losses like they're toothpicks or something.
Yep.
Oh, Russia lost 500 soldiers today. And oh, that's terrible. 500 families have been devastated.
Right.
That makes me think, though, with Memorial Day, we know we recognize it as an American holiday. Other countries have something similar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, maybe not on
necessarily the same day. Yeah.
Right. Laying the wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. I think, a lot of the major countries have a similar memorial ceremony for their loss.
Chuck, guys, this last week I decided that I was going to go on a tour of Washington, D.C. I live there. I live there. It's crazy, right? But I just decided that I don't want to live in a place that I don't know anything about,
Right.
And I went, and there was, I think, the Korean War. They have a memorial for the Korean War veterans. And when I walk through there, I even look at and I'm not getting political, but it's still almost considered to be ongoing, because it wasn't really solved. You know what I mean? And you walk through there and you have this sense of now sorrowful. Okay, sorrows, prayers. I'm sorry, I'm going through through Bridgerton, I think it is, whatever. Sorrows, prayer. You walk through there and you get to this place where you're sorry for those families whose family members died, and really, what is the outcome? What came? What did we come away with? Even out in DC, you still have the veteran wall, the Vietnam Wall, the Vietnam Wall, and you still pass by there, and you see people, not Memorial Day, but you see people out there with their pencils,
right?
That they're able to get the name of their family member that they probably don't even know. I don't even know. So,
or children that didn't know their fathers,
exactly,
except for what was remembered, on their wall.
Grandparents or whichever that's there. Memorial Day for me, and I think when we were talking about it before, I would have been one of those guys that would say, "Hey, Happy Memorial Day," or or a guy that's in a uniform, or one of our service people in uniform. "Hey, Happy Memorial Day." It takes time for you to recognize that this is a day of remembrance. We don't go to communion in our church and say, Happy Communion or happy, we don't do that. It's a time for us to remember. And I'm not sure, I think we were talking about this before, that even though it's Memorial Day, there's a certain time frame in the day that's set aside that we all should be stopping or something like that, and being able to say, okay, let's remember those who have passed. Yep. And I honestly think it's something that we need to do.
Speaking of that, I think people are hearing it and feeling a little like convicted that, I haven't really thought much about how I can honor these people. So what are some practical things that the average person can do to show proper respect?
One thing I can suggest that's really easy but profound, either yourself or your family, you can stop everybody, at the backyard, barbecue or whatever, or as a single person in your home. Just take 60 seconds of total silence.
There you go.
With the intent of, remembering those who have given their life, and for the Lord to continue to be with the families of the lost. Just 60 seconds.
Yeah.
I like that. Very practical.
Yeah. I know a lot of folks are probably feeling a little guilty about the barbecues, the boat rides, and the boatloads of sales that they partake in. But the reality is, you can remember a fallen soldier by learning more about this occasion, Memorial Day, the history of it. There are books on it. There are museums in your area, probably. There are museums, parades, public ceremonies that probably happen in your area on Memorial Day. And just like Chuck mentioned, you can take time to just have a moment of silence. As a matter of fact, since the year 2000, every Memorial Day at 3 p.m. is a national moment of remembrance.
I didn't even know that.
Yes. And so at 3 p.m., everyone should pause and be silent and reflect for a minute on those who have given the ultimate sacrifice, their life. What else can you do? You can go to a grave site and decorate it with flowers. Some of those grave sites have been abandoned or left alone for years. And so they might not have a family left behind. And so you can honor their sacrifice by showing up and honoring them. You also can wear red, white, and blue, but you don't have to wear the flag. But you can wear the colors that celebrate or honor the occasion, not celebrate, but honor the occasion. And also you can also go to a veterans, a VA facility. I guarantee you there is a person who has a friend or a loved one
Yeah.
who is mourning their loss.
Man, GP.
They might have served alongside them. They might have served before them or after them.
It's true.
But there's someone who was mourning on this day.
GP, what about, like, for instance, houses of worship? If houses of worship took a survey of how many of their members who served in the military, you could create a wall of remembrance in your church.
Right.
Yep.
And put their names and put their faces up there, because when you put a face and a name and a rank and what conflict they were involved in, it just means so much more. You see that person and you imagine what that person was like and how they were lost in a particular conflict, whatever war they were involved in. But it speaks of even just that church saying, we're remembering our own.
Right.
I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. And, going back to what we were saying, regardless of how you feel about war, why we went to war, who was the president when we went to war, and all of that stuff, we have to separate that from the people who were willing to go out there and risk their lives for our freedom. So we benefit from their sacrifice. But yet we don't want to take the time to acknowledge what they have done. And I think that's what we kind of need to put at the forefront of our minds. Even though we may not support war or anything like that, we should pay respect for those who were willing to go out there and die for our best interest. I think that deserves.
Well, on that, to kind of give a different angle, their families, for whatever reason, whatever their political persuasion is, or some families are very angry that they lost a precious loved one.
Yep.
And they ask the question, for what?
Yeah.
Mercy.
And I don't want to get into the good guy, bad guy politics and all that. But there are families that ache because they don't know why they died. For what did they die for?
Yeah.
If you see a police officer on the street and he's trying to protect a person and they take a bullet or they fall, in the process of saving someone, you say, oh wow, he gave his life to help that person. That's different from sending someone 10,000 miles away from home and they're being shot and killed or whatever. And you have to ask yourself, for what? And I'm sure there are other families who feel like, my dad, my uncle, my grandfather was a brave person and really believed that he was protecting our country and protecting our freedom. So there are different perspectives on the why,
Right. Yeah.
And if the sacrifice, they feel that the sacrifice was a wasted kind of thing. I just wanted to kind of touch on that, not to get politicize it and all that, but there are some families and children of parents who were lost that say, why did my parents have to leave for that kind of thing? Let's just keep that in mind.
Because the reality is sometimes some wars, they become wars because somebody picked a fight when there was no issue.
Yeah, right.
And the fact that my loved one signed up to serve my country, they might not agree with the issue, but they have volunteered to serve.
Right. And I think that's what you're honoring, not necessarily why they died, but you're honoring that they were willing to put themselves in a situation to die, for the country. So that's.
And another main issue, very vital issue, is that everyone was in the prime of their lives.
Right.
18 up to 50-ish, where life was good. Many of them were very young, in their 20s and 30s and even before. And so when you see your loved one lose life so quickly and little children are left behind, it's really devastating.
Right. Even more so why we should honor them. Now let's talk a little bit about, because we're trying to kind of help people personalize this. Let's talk a little bit about what we know about the demographics, or the makeup of these those fallen soldiers.
Well, I was trying to do some research. It's interesting when we pick a topic and we do our research and what have you on it. Wow, we learn so much.
Yeah.
We learn so much, and we just take it for granted.
Yeah.
Things come in and out of our lives. We read a headline, oh, that's terrible, and then we move on, to the cat videos and whatever. So, when you deep dive into to Memorial Day, I was intrigued by, when you think of a soldier, male or female, you're not thinking about race.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a little research, and I was just amazed that just from World War II, if I can recite some of these numbers, the 16 million men and women in the services during World War II, it's a lot of people, 16 million men and women in World War II. 1 million of them were African Americans.
Wow.
33,000 plus were Japanese Americans. 20,000 of those soldiers were Chinese Americans. 16,000 Filipino Americans. And there were Native American, there's a huge number for Native Americans. I think it was, it was, I'm sorry, 24,000 Native Americans. Now, think about that for a moment.
Yeah, I am.
When we get this, wartime propaganda, even back then in World War II, you didn't see African American soldiers marching down the street. You didn't see, they weren't identified as, Native Americans. They were American soldiers. And I find it ironic that a country that brought into their ranks African Americans, Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans, Native Americans, and these were the very same people.
Yep.
Were abused.
Yeah.
Yep.
Fighting for the country.
But I want to remember all of those ethnic groups and their families for the sacrifice that they made. And that's not to take away from our, Caucasian brethren and it's not taking away from that. But oftentimes the other races are not recognized for their sacrifice.
And hey, I have a question, Chuck. I don't know if there's been any research done on the percentages or the number of times that those ethnic groups were intentionally put on the front lines.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. In fact, I came across I have to follow up on it because it really intrigued me. I saw a title about there was a mass hanging of African American soldiers. I've got a deep dive in it. I really don't have any real details, but it intrigued me. And what that's telling us, ladies and gentlemen, American citizens, is that there is a dark side to this country in the way we have treated ethnic groups. And it's awful because, these people bleed red blood like everybody else, and their families are hurt and devastated by their loss. So we got some praying to do for this country, because when you look at all of these people, and I'm sure you've seen movies or like the Native Americans were doing coding and secret coding for the military, the Tuskegee Airmen.
Yep.
Expert fighter pilots whose job it was to protect the bombers. And the thing is, their record shows that they never lost a single bomber because they were expert fighter pilots. That doesn't hit the headlines a lot, except for maybe, Black History Month.
Right.
But these are men and women that just sacrificed their life, their families, and did exemplary work. So let's remember not only the fact that they served, but they were experts at what they did.
That's right. That's right. Now, what about women? who served. I mean, I know because we talk about what we think about when we think about the American soldiers, and a lot of times, I'm going to be honest, propaganda, you just saw white male.
Right.
But we know that that's not the full representation of those who serve. Like, as you just pointed out, we had various ethnic groups, but we also had women who served and died. They sometimes we think the women were in the back, or they were doing nursing, or they were taking care of the troops, but they weren't actively fighting, and that's not the reality.
But the women, though, whatever our perception is, their role was, if they wore the uniform and they were on the battlefield or back in the United States in the office, that was still a noble thing for them to do.
That's true.
And I can tell you, I mean, you have you all seen the series? It's an old series. I may be dating myself, but MASH. You remember seeing MASH? Okay. And you notice in that series that women played a major role.
Yeah, that's true.
In those MASH units, nurses, doctors, tending to the wounded. That's just as noble as someone carrying a weapon.
That's right.
On the front line.
Service. Yeah.
Some of them still died. As I did some research on the women, I did find that there are 2 million plus female veterans just in, who have served the country.
How many did you say? How
2
many?
million plus.
You said 2 million. Okay.
2 million plus, right? Women who have served in the military, armed forces. And those who died in combat, I was doing some research, and it said 1,000 plus American females were casualties of war. During World War II, there were 359 service women who died in combat. That was World War One. I'm sorry, World War II, 543 died. Most of them from vehicles and aircraft accidents. Some of them were nurses. Korean War, 17 of them died. Vietnam, 8 died. And the Gulf War, 16 died. But since the war on terrorism that started after 9/11, 152 women have died. But I do want to share this with you. It says 152 women deployed to Afghanistan, Iraq, Kuwait, and Syria lost their lives in service to America. The number includes 2 women who were killed during the chaotic retreat and evacuation of Americans and Afghans from Karzai International Airport in Kabul in August 2021. All right.
Wow.
So many of them have served in combat and died. But I also want to share this because they were thinking at one time, as Chuck was saying, many of the women who went into war, were nurses or doctors, and they didn't really do a lot of combat. And I think there were restrictions for women in war where, they were not allowed to fight in combat. But under President Obama, they passed, they gave them rights to fight in military, and they were added to the infantry. It says here that President Barack Obama, his Secretary of Defense, Ashton Carter, ordered the military services to assign women to infantry units at the tip of the spear battalion level, overruling the Marine Corps request for exemptions. So, in other words, women have always wanted to be equal, right? They want you to know that, hey, we can fight too, right? And so this was a way of allowing them to fight and also advance so that they could become 4-star generals and admirals and things like that. And so that's why we see a lot of women who died actually in combat. And I want to give honor to some of those women. I'm going to call out their names because it is printed information, but I want to recognize them on today, as many have left children and spouses to grieve their loss. Marine Sergeant Jeanette L. Winters, 25 years old. She was killed in a crash in Pakistan mountains. We have Staff Sergeant Anissa Shero, 31 years old, who also died as the plane was taking off for special operations. Tamara Archuluda, she was a co-pilot for the Hawk helicopter, which crashed while picking up two injured Afghan children. There are some Laura W. Walker, 24, IED attack on a Humvee, and this was in August of 2025. Also want to shout out this name, Lori Ann Pastiwa, 23, captured and died in captivity in Iraq. So some of these women have, and I have a whole list of names, people who have died from crash, IEDs, suicide attacks, that were them, all types. And these were women who decided to go and wanted to go to protect their country in whatever way they thought was necessary. So I just want to honor all of those women who have served, all of those who died and gave their lives. You can see so many were young in their 20s and 30s. So we, on this Memorial Day, we don't want to just eat our burgers and enjoy.
Right.
Recognize that people did die for our freedom, whether we agree with what they should have done. They wanted to be there and be a part.
That's right.
So I lift my hat to them.
Yes, thank you. That reminds me, from saying their names just now, we want to invite our listening audience, if you have someone that you know who died or passed while serving, please put their names in the chat. We'd like to honor them. And even if you watch this after the fact, add your names to the chat as well. I think that's part of, helping others be a little bit more cognizant of these are real people who have real connections to real people, and they deserve to be honored. So go ahead and put those names in the chat. Thank you.
I'm going to throw a curve. May not be a curve.
Okay, curvous.
But I can throw it because I'm not clergy. What biblical perspective can we attribute to Memorial Day? Is there an instance, a situation, a passage that will correlate with what we recognize as Memorial Day? As you know, there are many battles in the Bible. many battles.
Yeah. And times that God sent his people to fight against the enemy. Look at the children of Israel were to take over all of those nations and their land so that they could have the promised land. I'm sure they celebrate, they celebrated a lot because God gave them territory and they had to do a lot of fighting. Look at Joshua. He had to lead, the people to fight.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you look at Greece, Greece has a lot of statues that they recognize, a lot of their soldiers, leaders who became, memorialized, for their great battles, and protecting their country. So I was just curious as to what can we see in Scripture?
Yeah,
that points
I have
to
one.
that.
So in Exodus, Moses was told to take the bones of Joseph with him, right, when he left Egypt. And those bones will be buried eventually in Shechem. And so the idea of carrying someone who has passed, their bones with you into the future. I remember about those stones when those descendants were asking, well, what do these stones even mean? Opportunity to pass the stone of information, the stone of legacy, the stone of history, which helps to fortify their identity and their faith as a people.
Right.
Yeah. And I do want to say too, kind of the same vein, that those who serve, there's a there's a spiritual connection there, in terms of, we always say we're on the battlefield for our Lord, but when you're literally on the battlefield and the only being that can intervene or assist you, these are deeply rooted spiritual people who call on God, and they pray. I mean, of course we know it's not everyone, but I've seen so many troops come together in their faith as units, because being out there, or even some of them finding it in a deeper way from serving, because they understand their reliance in some of those situations is completely in God's hands. They've seen the miracles. They've seen, like, when things hit someone, but the person comes out unscathed, or they've seen where things could have gone completely left and miraculous things have happened. And so, sometimes we just think about, they're just going to war, but for them, it is a deeply spiritual experience, and a lot of times they come back even more fortified in their faith because of their service to the country. So I think we want to acknowledge.
Listen, even if you want to, I'm trying to be Tally here. You know how Tally with you right now, he'd just be doing this thing. But John 15:13, greater love had no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. And you're right. There is a spiritual connection, or a hypnotic, if you want to call it that, to when you're going out, you're fighting for the right. After 2001, what has occurred in the United States with the Pentagon and etc., it was the largest amount of people who decided that they wanted to fight for the United States. All right. I mean, and we were not technically in wartime at that time. We weren't technically in wartime, but people said, hey, we want to fight for what's right. And I think that what happens is that even though we focus on what the good of it is, we focus on the families too. The Bible text that I have looked up is for us to be able to share in the sufferings of those who have suffered. 2 Timothy 2:3, sharing the sufferings as a good soldier of Christ Jesus. There's always Psalms, give justice to the weak and to the fatherless. Of course, we think in so many males, right? Maintain the rights of the afflicted. I know it's Memorial Day, and we talk about those who have been, though have passed, but there are a lot who pass later on from what has happened on the battlefield, not just physically, but also mentally. It's a casualty of war when we're looking at suicide because of mental anguish and pain. So yeah, there is a biblical standpoint to it, spiritual. There's a spiritual move to say, let's fight for our country. Let's fight for the right. What happened in Iraq? They're not Christians, but we fight for Jesus Christ, who's a Christian, almost going back to the Crusaders type thing. So though we still honor those who have passed, we still have to be careful of not even hurting citizens who are who's affected, who's also affected by this.
As I think about it, the greatest Memorial Day and the greatest soldier to remember is Jesus.
I have to be.
He took a bullet for all of us.
Oh, come on, man.
And died and rose again. So when you look at it from that perspective, he was the ultimate defender.
That's right.
The ultimate defender. And he paid the ultimate price. But thank God he rose again.
Yeah.
Amen.
And with that, I say, the war ain't over.
But the battle is won. The battle is won.
Yeah, and we all have an opportunity to be part of his army. So I'm
I wanted to add this. I'll never forget when Danny Davis had passed, and he was a military man, and we were planning, his service, and of course, I wanted to get someone out there to play the bugle, play taps. Taps is something that remember we talked about the 3 o'clock that's come by. Going to start to see a lot of people from that remembrance to play taps during this. And of course, it's also played at funerals. But taps as a bugle call sounded to signal lights out at the end of a military day.
Yeah.
So it's always been played, even if it's not to death, it's lights out. Chuck, if I can tie that in with you when you were talking about Jesus as being
the
ultimate sacrifice, the ultimate military. I mean, wasn't he anyway? Right, Michael, the archangel.
The war started.
When I look at all of that, I point that together to say he is the light of the world. All right, and we are his little lights. No matter what idiosyncrasies we may have as far as the military may be concerned, which we do have the largest military, biggest defense fund ever. We also got to think we ought to encourage people. We ought to be able to be that little light. For the light that goes out in military playing taps, that's beautiful. Oh, y'all got me preaching now. Where's my organ? And now I'm thinking about when the trumpet blasts.
All right.
And then when that happens, I think about those. There's a lot of military people who died on the battlefield that was from self-inflicted wounds. Not just self-inflicted because of the anguish and the grief. A lot of people went into the military for benefits, school and family and all of that. And then all of a sudden their lives were lost because of this thing. So I just want to say to this that every night there's taps, but joy really comes in the morning. I can't imagine what Arlington National Cemetery and the rest of the cemeteries, that's not the only one, it's spread out all across our nation. What it's going to look like when grace comes upon them and be saved in God's kingdom. So I just wanted to add that taps piece.
Sure.
And before we go, talking about the tomb of the unknown soldiers, I know we talked earlier about people putting the names of those, but the reason that tomb of the unknown soldiers exists is because there were some people who perished and they didn't have all the names. They didn't know who they were. I mean, but they wanted to honor them in some way, and that's why that's there, and that's why that's part of the tradition to lay the wreath there. We may not have your name, but we understand that you
and you know what, and just as a side note, if you go to visit, take my advice, be respectful.
That's right,
because those Marines will come at you.
They will.
They will. I mean, I've actually seen it.
They will.
If you're disrespectful around that tomb, I mean, those are not just parade rifles. I'm telling you, and I didn't know. I mean, you just thought it was a place to visit when you're a tourist, but that's a very sacred ground for them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they do take it seriously. So if you do anything, say anything, do anything that would disgrace that memorial, they will confront you. So it's serious.
That says a lot, like what the scripture that Pat gave, no greater love than a man would lay down his life. And so even, today people know when you give your life for something, that's an ultimate gift. It says to us as well, we should not take for granted all that God did in laying his life down. How many people just come to church out of routine, or, they just, communion is not that much, Some people, you see them leave church at communion time, not realizing that that's when you honor the death of Christ because of his great sacrifice. And so we when people give their all, we should acknowledge that and respect it.
Yeah, agreed.
You know, I just want to give a little shout out. It was probably more appropriate for the beginning, but I think it ties in really good because of what this means to me. You know, Biden had nominated General Charles Q. Brown to be the new Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Yeah,
he is a African-American fighter pilot, and now I think he's appointed on maybe they have to confirm him. I'm not sure how that process works, but I'm hoping, and the reason I say this is because some of the most intelligent, heartfelt,
go ahead, Chuck,
honest people in Washington are former officers or generals.
That's
right.
Because they've seen it
They've
all.
seen it. Yep.
Yes.
And my prayer is if General Brown becomes, he's probably confirmed. I'm not quite sure how the story goes. It says that he was nominated, and then another story says he was appointed. If General Brown is the Joint Chiefs, my prayer is that he will have a dialogue of peace with those other 4-star generals. Talk peace. These are all men and women, high-ranking generals that have seen war, and they are the ones. He's not confirmed yet. Okay. Well, if he's confirmed, I'm hoping that he and many other intelligent officers will start talking more peace than warfare.
Yes.
Yes. Mercy. Well, guys, I know I learned a little bit more about. I'm laughing because I'm like, here I am, 44, and I'm learning something about this day for the first time. But that's what it's about. I think, about growth. A lot of things we just fall in stride with what the rest of the world is doing. But I think it was important for us to kind of just take a moment to sit back and look a little deeper into something that we celebrate every year, or even saying we're celebrating now, we honor. Well, we've been celebrating, but really we should kind of shift to honoring. On Memorial Day. I feel convicted. And I think it's important for us to kind of balance this out. We're not saying don't have your barbecue, your cookouts and stuff, but still carve out some time to recognize me. That's what we're saying. We're not saying.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the iPad on the table on the patio and you're listening to the UpSet podcast, doing that veggie burger.
Yeah.
Okay? Just after you flip it, okay, just say, everybody, chill for 60 seconds.
Right.
For those who have sacrificed their life for this country. That's all. And then you go back to flip.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's all we're saying.
Then you can go back and flip your wallet at the store.
Yeah, sale. Hey, I can't be mad at anyone who takes advantage of a good sale. So we're not saying, not to do that. But yeah, I think it's very important. And we just want to honor, take time to honor them. Now, as a matter of fact, guys, can we take 60 seconds right now and do this, that?
I think you're muted, Tasha.
Sorry, yes, but thank you. That ends our 60 seconds. But it's something
where
how
I was after a while.
yeah, a moment of silence really is impactful, and it just doesn't take long. So thank you. For those who thought maybe we had frozen.
Seems like a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about that happening in the midst of a barbecue, how it can almost seem like, but and especially like 3:00 on Monday, tomorrow. You know, take that time and let's teach our young people too the significance of these things. I think it's important. I know I plan to have that discussion with my daughters, just make sure they get it, learn some more things than I did when I was their age about it. So all right, well, we thank you guys for tuning in to this episode. I do want to let you know about the UpSet merch. We want to continue to thank those who have been supporting the merch because, of course, we know that it's not just about the merch. It's about supporting causes and situations that are important to you all. And, you know, here's some people who have their mugs, and we have our caps, and we do have the shirts as well. Want you to know that as you give, you are benefiting people in need. And our first, ready to give out our first installment, we've decided that we would like to target one of our schools with a particular financial need. It could be for a student or something that the school is in need of. But we want you all to decide. We don't want it to be our choice in terms of which school and what need. So we're asking that you submit. And our first installment will be about $400. We have it. We're ready to give it. We just need the cause. So if you know of a student in need with one of our schools or a school that has a particular need and can benefit from that, please email us at upset@aecsda.com. Tell us about it. And we're going to present these back to you all, and you help us decide how. I mean, it's going to be tough. And sometimes when we do these, people donate to the other causes too. So that's why we like to share them all, because we recognize there are more needs than what we have enough money for, but we want to at least put them out there. And so please submit your recommendations to us. And we hope to be able to report next week what they are. So you have a couple of days.
And if no one else responds and no one else gives suggestions, we have a doctoral student or two in the UpSet podcast crew, and we'll just give it to them, Marlena or Pat. So they're students.
All right. I was going to kind of, I mean, I didn't run this by the executive producer ahead of time, but I'm just going to go out on a limb. Anyone that is willing to match the number that we
like
have.
Limbs going out there. Yeah.
Right. And say, hey, you know what the amount is right now. If you are willing to match it, would I really be going out on the limb? Anyone who wants to match that amount would get some free merch.
Oh, absolutely.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, you would definitely get some free merch. I mean, that's the least we can do for that kind.
So if we can get someone to match it, several to match it, that would be even more impactful for the recipient.
Yes. Yeah. And there's so many needs out there, and we want to be able to address as many of them as possible. So thank you for going out on that limb, Charles. That was great. All right, guys. Well, we hope that you enjoy the rest of this weekend. We hope you will find time to carve out to honor those who serve, and we look forward to seeing you back here next week, same time, same place. Because if it's Sunday,
it's the UpSet podcast.
All right, guys, have a great week. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Blessings, everyone.